Please, she whispered, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other raised in surrender. Please don't. The bounty hunter's finger rested on the trigger, his gray eyes hard as flint beneath the shadow of his hat. The woman before him swayed on her feet, face pale as bone china against the crimson sunset bleeding across the Montana horizon. Dust from her desperate flight still hung in the air between them like a veil. "You're worth $500, dead or alive," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't collect. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference." Her knees buckled. She caught herself against a boulder, leaving a smear of blood on the sun-warmed stone. Those words, dead or alive, seemed to drain the last of her strength. The baby kicked hard, a flutter of life against her ribs, and she pressed both hands to her stomach now, as if she could shield the child from the cold reality of wanted posters and bounty hunters and the merciless justice of the frontier. "Because I'm innocent," she breathed. "Because I'm carrying a child who doesn't deserve to die for crimes I didn't commit. Because, she never finished. Her eyes rolled back, legs giving out completely, and she crumpled to the dusty ground like a rag doll, unconscious before she hit the earth. The bounty hunter lowered his revolver slowly, staring at the fallen woman. Her wanted poster crinkled in his shirt pocket. Eleanor Hartwell, accused of theft and conspiracy, last seen fleeing eastward from Wyoming. But the poster didn't mention she was heavy with child, didn't say anything about the desperation carved into her delicate eastern features, didn't capture the truth or lies hiding in those green eyes. He holstered his weapon and knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. Steady, but weak. The baby moved visibly beneath her threadbare dress, a small foot or elbow pushing against the fabric. She was burning with fever. The bounty hunter looked west toward Redemption Ridge, then east toward his isolated camp in the foothills. $500, enough to buy that piece of land he'd been eyeing, enough to finally stop hunting men for money and settle into something resembling peace. But something in him, some last shred of the honorable man he had been before the war, before loss had carved him hollow, wouldn't let him throw a pregnant woman over his saddle like a sack of grain. He cursed under his breath, scooped her up as gently as he could manage, and started toward his camp. Whatever choice he made tonight would change everything. You know how some decisions haunt a man for the rest of his life? The kind that divide your existence into before and after, into who you were and who you become. For Jake Stockton, that decision came on a Thursday evening in August 1882, when he chose to save a woman instead of collecting her bounty. His camp sat in a protected hollow between two rocky outcroppings, hidden from the main trail by a stand of ponderosa pines. He'd built it 3 years ago when the tracking had become more profitable than trying to work cursed land that yielded nothing but dust and disappointment. A lean-to shelter, a fire ring circled with stones, a small spring that provided clean water year-round. It was Spartan but functional, like everything else in Jake's life since the war. He laid Eleanor, though he only knew her name from the wanted poster, on his bedroll and covered her with his spare blanket. She was slight, couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, even with the baby, and up close he could see the signs of hard travel, blistered feet and worn-through boots, scratches on her arms from brambles, lips cracked from thirst. Her dark brown hair had come loose from its pins, spreading across his saddle that served as a pillow. Jake built up the fire and set water to boil. He'd learned field medicine during the war, enough to keep men alive until they reached a real doctor anyway. He checked her temperature with the back of his hand. Definitely fever, but not dangerously high. Dehydration and exhaustion, most likely. He'd seen plenty of both. When the water cooled enough, he lifted her head gently and coaxed liquid past her lips. She swallowed reflexively, throat working. Good sign. He tore clean cloth into strips, dampened them, and pressed them to her forehead and wrists to bring down the fever. The baby kicked again, and Jake found himself staring at her belly with something like awe. He'd never seen a pregnant woman up close, had never been that kind of close to any woman. Not since before the war. His wife Sarah had died of cholera 3 months after he'd enlisted, along with their unborn child. That was 15 years ago, but some wounds never quite healed, just scabbed over and ached in the rain. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, sitting back on his heels. This woman was wanted by the law. $500, that wasn't nothing. That was hope. That was future. That was finally putting down roots instead of drifting from bounty to bounty like tumbleweeds. But she was also pregnant and innocent until proven guilty, and Jake had seen enough injustice in his 38 years to know that wanted posters didn't always tell the whole truth. Eleanor stirred as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then memory crashed back and fear widened those green eyes. "Easy," Jake said, raising one hand. "You're safe, for now." She tried to sit up, gasped, and pressed a hand to her belly. "The baby is fine from what I can tell. You collapsed from dehydration and exhaustion. When's the last time you ate?" She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language, then slowly sank back against the saddle. I I don't remember. Yesterday? The day before?" Her eyes darted to his holstered revolver, then back to his face. "Why haven't you turned me in?" "Haven't decided yet," Jake said honestly. "But you needed water and rest first. Can't collect a bounty on a corpse," he caught himself. "Well, I could, but I won't. Not from a pregnant woman." Tears spilled down her cheeks, sudden and silent. She turned her face to him as if ashamed of showing such weakness. "You don't understand. I can't go back. They'll hang me or they'll—" She choked on a sob. "I didn't do what they say I did." "They all say that," Jake replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'm sure they do." Eleanor wiped at her tears with trembling fingers. "But in my case, it happens to be true. I was a school teacher in Providence, Wyoming. I had nothing, was nothing, just another spinster teaching other people's children. Then Carson Dalton took an interest in me." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I thought he wanted to court me properly. I was so foolish." Jake stirred the fire, saying nothing, letting her talk. He was charming at first, brought flowers, spoke of marriage. "I was 28 years old and alone in the world. My parents died of fever 3 years back. So when Carson proposed, I accepted, even though something felt wrong. The way he looked at me sometimes, like I was a possession he'd acquired." She drew a shaky breath. "2 weeks before the wedding, I discovered what he really wanted. I overheard him talking with his brother about a land deed. My father had left me a small parcel outside town. Worthless, I'd always thought. But they'd discovered silver on it. Carson planned to marry me, get the deed transferred to him, then arrange an accident once the marriage was legal." The fire crackled between them while Jake processed Eleanor's words, watching the way her hands never left her swollen belly, protective even in her exhaustion. "So you ran," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Not at first." Eleanor's voice steadied as she continued her story, as if speaking it aloud helped her believe it herself. "I was terrified, but I tried to be smart about it. I went to Sheriff Morrison, told him what I'd heard. But Carson Dalton owns half of Providence. The saloon, the bank, the freight company. Sheriff Morrison is on his payroll." Her laugh was bitter. "He told me I was suffering from pre-wedding nerves, that I'd misunderstood. Then he left me in his office and went to fetch Carson." Jake poured coffee from his battered pot, handed her a tin cup. The liquid was bitter as sin, but hot and fortifying. Eleanor wrapped both hands around it like it was precious gold. "I climbed out the window and ran. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and $37 I'd saved from teaching. I took the first stage east, thinking I'd go back to Boston, where I was born, find work, disappear." She sipped the coffee, winced at its strength. "But Carson followed. He sent men after me, not just to retrieve me, but to silence me permanently. In Deadwood, they cornered me in a boarding house. I barely escaped through a second-story window. That's when I discovered I was carrying Carson's child." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Jake said nothing, his weathered face unreadable in the firelight. "I never—" Eleanor's voice cracked. He forced himself on me one night after dinner. He'd put something in my wine. I woke up in my own bed hours later, knowing what had happened but unable to prove it. That was 2 months before the wedding. Fresh tears tracked down her cheeks. I thought about ending the pregnancy. There's a woman in Deadwood who helps girls in trouble. But I couldn't. This baby didn't ask to be created from violence. This baby is innocent. And the theft charges? Jake asked quietly. Fabricated. Carson claimed I stole money from the school and jewelry from his mother. All lies, but lies backed by a dozen false witnesses he paid off. The wanted poster went up 3 weeks ago. She met his eyes directly. I swear on my parents' graves and on this child's life, I stole nothing. I'm guilty only of being naive enough to trust a monster. Jake stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the firelight, staring out at the darkness pooling in the valley below. Behind him, Eleanor's breathing grew shallow with fear. She probably thought he'd decided to turn her in, to collect his blood money and wash his hands of her troubles. Truth was, Jake believed her. He'd known plenty of Carson Daltons in his time, men who smiled while they cut your throat, who used law and money as weapons more deadly than any gun. He'd tracked enough bounties to recognize the difference between hardened criminals and desperate victims. Eleanor Hartwell was no outlaw, just a woman who'd run out of choices in a world that gave women precious few to begin with. But believing her and helping her were two very different things. You got any proof? He asked, turning back. Anything that might clear your name? Eleanor shook her head slowly. Just my word, and that's worthless against Carson's influence. Jake crouched by the fire again, decision crystallizing in his mind like ice forming on a winter creek. It was probably the stupidest thing he'd done since charging that Confederate position at Shiloh, but some things mattered more than money. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You are going to rest tonight and eat something tomorrow. Then we're going to figure out how to keep you and that baby alive. He held up a hand as hope flared in her eyes. I'm not promising anything beyond that, but I won't turn you in to hang for crimes you didn't commit. Why, bah, the word escaped her lips as barely a whisper. You don't know me. $500 is more than I've seen in 6 months, Jake finished. I know, but I've got one rule I don't ever break. I don't hunt innocent people. I've bent that rule before. Looked the other way when I shouldn't have. But a pregnant woman? He shook his head. That's where I draw the line. Eleanor's hand reached out tentatively, stopping short of touching his arm. Thank you. I don't know how to repay. Don't thank me yet, Jake said gruffly. Carson Dalton sent men after you. They'll keep coming. And when word gets out that I'm harboring you instead of collecting the bounty, I'll have problems of my own. He poked at the fire with a stick. But we'll deal with those problems when they arrive. He pulled dried meat and hardtack from his supplies, handed them to Eleanor. She ate slowly at first, then more eagerly as her body remembered its hunger. Jake watched the way she savored each bite, the way she kept one hand on her belly as if in constant communication with the life growing inside her. How far along are you? He asked. 7 months, near as I can figure. The baby should come in October, maybe early November. 2 months. Jake calculated distances and dangers in his head. 2 months to keep her hidden and safe, to help her deliver a child in the wilderness, to somehow clear her name or get her far enough away that Carson Dalton's reach couldn't find her. My name's Jake, and he said finally. Jake Stockton. Used to farm outside Billings before the war. Now I track bounties and try not to think too hard about whether the men I hunt deserve what's coming to them. Eleanor Hartwell, she replied, though he already knew that. Former school teacher, current fugitive, soon-to-be mother to a child who deserves better than running and hiding. They sat in silence as night deepened around the camp, two broken people brought together by chance and desperation. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, finding Eleanor better shelter, acquiring supplies, watching for Dalton's men. But tonight, by the fire's warm glow, they had reached an unspoken understanding. Sometimes survival meant trusting the last person you expected to save you. The morning sun painted the Montana mountains in shades of rose and gold when Eleanor woke to find Jake already up, cooking something that smelled like heaven over the fire. Beans and salt pork, he said without turning around, somehow knowing she'd stirred. Not fancy, but it'll keep you going. Eleanor struggled to sit up, her back protesting and the baby doing somersaults against her ribs. She was acutely aware of how she must look. Dress filthy from days of travel, hair a tangled mess, face probably streaked with dirt and dried tears. But Jake Stockton wasn't looking at her like she was shameful or pathetic. He looked at her the way a man might regard a wounded animal he'd decided to nurse back to health, with cautious practicality and something that might become compassion given time. "There's a spring 20 feet that way," Jake gestured with his tin spoon. "Water's cold, but clean. I'll turn my back if you want to wash up before eating." Such simple consideration, but it nearly brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. For weeks she'd been sleeping in ditches, stealing water from horse troughs, always running, always afraid. The luxury of washing her face in clean water felt like a gift from God himself. She found the spring where he'd said, a clear pool fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. The water was indeed freezing, but Eleanor scrubbed her face and hands, combed her fingers through her tangled hair as best she could. When she returned to camp, Jake had 2 tin plates ready, heaped with beans and meat. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning birds calling from the pines above. Eleanor tried not to wolf the food down, but hunger and the baby's needs made restraint difficult. Jake slid his remaining salt pork onto her plate without comment. "We need to talk about what comes next," Jake said when they'd finished, pouring more of that terrible coffee. "You can't stay here. My camp's too exposed, too close to the main trail, and you're in no condition to keep running." "I know," Eleanor said quietly, "but I don't know where to go. East back to Boston is too far in my condition. West means going deeper into territories where Carson has connections. North into Canada, maybe, but—" "There's a third option," Jake interrupted. "About 15 miles north of here, up in the high country, there's an old trapper's cabin. Nobody's used it in years since the trapper died. Old fellow named Silas, kept to himself. The cabin's rough but sound, got a good spring nearby, and it's off any regular trail. You could hide there until the baby comes." Eleanor studied his weathered face, trying to read the thoughts behind those gray eyes. "And you just leave me there?" "I check on you regular," Jake said. "Bring supplies, make sure you're safe, but I've got to keep working, keep taking bounties, or folks will wonder why Jake Stockton suddenly stopped hunting. Can't afford questions or attention right now." It made sense, Eleanor supposed, but the thought of being alone in a mountain cabin, heavily pregnant, dependent on a bounty hunter who had every financial reason to betray her, it terrified her more than she wanted to admit. "What if Carson's men find me?" she asked. "What if you decide $500 is worth more than—" "I won't." Jake's voice was hard as iron. "I gave you my word. That might not mean much to you, but it's everything to me. It's all I got left that's worth a damn." Eleanor searched his face and found only truth there, Armand and unadorned. Whatever Jake Stockton had been before the war, whatever losses had carved those deep lines around his eyes, he was a man who lived by a code. She'd have to trust that code would keep her alive. "All right, the cabin. When do we leave?" "Today, soon as you're ready to ride. I'll put you on my gentlest horse, Juniper. She's steady as they come. We'll move slow, take rest breaks. Should reach the cabin by nightfall if we don't run into trouble." They packed up camp with practiced efficiency, Jake doing most of the work while Eleanor folded his bedroll and tried to be useful despite her ungainly condition. He'd been living rough for so long that he owned little, and what he did own was practical. Coffee pot, tin plates, a well-maintained rifle, bedding, basic supplies. The life of a man who'd learned to need nothing and no one. Juniper was indeed gentle, a dappled gray mare with kind eyes who stood patiently while Jake helped Eleanor into the saddle. He adjusted the stirrups, his calloused hands careful and impersonal, then mounted his own horse, a rangy buckskin gelding named Flint. They rode north into country that grew progressively wilder and more beautiful. Ponderosa pines gave way to Douglas fir and lodgepole pine, the air growing cooler and thinner as they climbed. Jake set an easy pace, stopping every hour to let Eleanor dismount and stretch, to drink water from his canteen, to rest. "You said you farmed before the war," Eleanor ventured during one such rest stop. "What made you turn to bounty hunting?" Jake was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, lost everything that mattered. Farm failed after I came back. Couldn't work it alone, and the land was cursed anyway. Nothing but grasshoppers and drought. Lost my wife while I was fighting. Lost, he paused. Lost the man I used to be. Hunting bounties is what I know now. Track, capture, collect. Simple enough that I don't have to think about what I gave up. I'm sorry, Eleanor said softly, about your wife. War takes more than soldiers, Jake replied. It takes their families too, just slower. He stood abruptly. We should keep moving. Got a few hours yet before we reach the cabin. They rode through the afternoon, the sun tracking across the vast Montana sky. Eleanor found herself studying Jake Stockton when he wasn't looking. The way he sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, the way his eyes constantly scanned the trail ahead and the ridgelines above, always watching for danger. He'd been a soldier once. She could see it in his bearing, in the careful way he moved. The war had been over for 17 years, but some men never really came home from it. As sunset approached, painting the mountain peaks in brilliant orange and crimson, Jake reined in Flint and pointed ahead. There, he said, your new home, at least for a while. Eleanor looked where he indicated and felt her heart sink. The cabin was barely visible through the trees, its log walls weathered gray by years of mountain weather. It looked small and isolated and impossibly remote. But it also looked safe, hidden, a place where Carson Dalton's men would never think to search. The cabin was everything Jake had promised and nothing Eleanor had hoped for. A single room with a stone fireplace, one window with cracked glass, a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But it was dry, and when Jake got a fire going in the fireplace, warmth spread through the small space, driving out the chill and the smell of abandonment. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself, trying to see possibility instead of desperation. I know it's not much, Jake said, sweeping mouse droppings out the door with a makeshift broom of pine branches. But old Silas kept the roof sound. You'll be dry, and that fireplace draws good. There's a spring about 50 yards down the slope. Best water in these mountains. Eleanor moved to the fireplace, holding her hands toward the warmth. The baby shifted inside her, and she wondered what kind of life she was bringing this child into. Born in a mountain cabin, daughter or son of a rapist, mother a fugitive from false justice. What hope did such a child have? Hey! Jake's voice was surprisingly gentle. He'd moved closer without her noticing. I know what you're thinking, but that baby's got you, and you're stronger than you know. You ran when you had to run. You survived when plenty wouldn't have. That takes steel, Eleanor Hartwell. She blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall. She was so tired of crying, of being weak and scared and dependent. I used to teach children their letters, she said. I had a little room above the general store, kept my books in alphabetical order, graded papers by lamplight. That was my life. Small and safe and predictable. Now I'm an outlaw hiding in a trapper's cabin, carrying a child conceived in violence, dependent on the mercy of a bounty hunter. Her laugh was shaky. How did I get here? You got here by being unlucky enough to catch a bad man's attention, Jake said bluntly. But you're not beaten yet. Women are tougher than most men give credit for. I learned that from my Sarah. She could birth a calf, shoot a rattlesnake, and bake bread with you all in the same morning. His voice went distant with memory. You've got that same kind of strength. You just haven't had cause to recognize it yet. Eleanor turned to face him fully. In the firelight, Jake Stockton looked less like a hard-bitten bounty hunter and more like a man who'd forgotten how to hope, but hadn't quite forgotten how to care. His gray eyes held a sadness that matched her own. Two people broken by different circumstances, but understanding each other's pain nonetheless. I'll need supplies, she said, forcing herself to be practical. Food, blankets, medical supplies for when the baby comes. I don't have money. I've got enough. Jake pulled a worn leather pouch from his coat, counted out bills. There's a trading post 30 miles west. Fellow named Henderson runs it. He's discreet, doesn't ask questions. I'll head there tomorrow, stock you up proper. Should last until the baby comes, maybe longer. Why are you doing this? Eleanor asked for the second time since meeting him. You could have collected that bounty. You could still collect it. Why risk yourself for a stranger? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. When my Sarah died, I was 1,000 miles away, fighting in a war I didn't believe in for causes that didn't matter. She died alone, scared, calling for me. That's what her sister wrote in the letter I got 6 months too late. Our baby died with her. Never drew a breath. He turned to look at Eleanor, and the pain in his eyes was ancient and bottomless. I couldn't save them, but maybe saving you makes the universe a little less cruel. Maybe it means something, even if I can't explain what. Eleanor reached out slowly and touched his arm, the first time she'd willingly made contact with a man since Carson Dalton. Jake flinched slightly but didn't pull away. Thank you, she whispered, for your honesty, for your help, for being a good man in a world that doesn't seem to value good men anymore. Don't paint me a saint, Jake warned. I've done things in the name of bounties that haunt me. I've looked the other way when I shouldn't have. I'm helping you because I need to believe I'm still capable of doing something right, not because I'm noble. Maybe that's the same thing, Eleanor suggested softly. They spent the rest of the evening making the cabin livable. Jake found old Silas's furniture still mostly intact, a rough-hewn bed frame that only needed rope for support, a table with 3 legs that Jake fixed with a spare piece of wood, 2 chairs that had survived the years. He strung rope across the bed frame and covered it with pine boughs, then his bedroll on top. You take the bed, he said when Eleanor protested. I'll sleep by the fire tonight. Head out at first light for Henderson's trading post. Be back before dark tomorrow with proper supplies. Eleanor wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones. The baby had been unusually active all day, tiny feet or hands pushing against her ribs, and her back ached from hours in the saddle. She lowered herself onto the makeshift bed, surprised by how comfortable it was, and pulled Jake's blanket around her shoulders. Jake, she said as he settled by the fire with his rifle across his knees, always the cautious soldier. If something happens to me, if the baby comes early, or if Carson's men find me, nothing's going to happen, he interrupted firmly. But if the worst comes to pass, I'll make sure your child is safe. You have my word on that. It should have been a terrible promise. The idea that she might die and leave her baby in the hands of a bounty hunter she'd met yesterday. But somehow Eleanor believed him. Whatever demons Jake Stockton carried, whatever darkness lived in his past, he was a man who kept his promises. She closed her eyes and for the first time in weeks, felt something almost like safety settle over her. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting frost on the cabin's single window in delicate crystalline patterns. Eleanor woke to find Jake already gone, the fire banked low but still warm, a note scratched on a piece of bark. Back by nightfall, bar the door, don't open it for anyone but me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. J. She held the bark, tracing the rough letters with her finger. Jake Stockton could barely write. His letters were childlike, unpracticed, but he'd taken the time to leave her instructions, to give her a way to know, friend from foe. Such a small gesture, but it warmed something in Eleanor's chest that had been frozen since Providence. The day stretched long and quiet. Eleanor explored her new home, such as it was. She found old Silas's traps still hanging from nails on the wall, rusted and useless now. A shelf held 3 battered tin cups, a plate with a crack through its center, a Dutch oven thick with ancient grease. In the corner, she discovered a crate containing candle stubs, a half-full tin of gun oil, and surprisingly, a book. She pulled it out with trembling hands. The Last of the Mohicans, its pages water-stained but readable. Eleanor clutched the book to her chest like a treasure. She'd been a teacher, had loved books more than almost anything, and finding one here in this remote cabin felt like a sign. She settled into one of the chairs and began to read, losing herself in Cooper's frontier adventures, forgetting for a moment that she was living her own desperate tale of survival on the edge of civilization. The baby kicked enthusiastically, and Eleanor placed the book on her belly, watching it bob with each movement. You like stories too? She murmured. Good. I'll read to you every night. I'll teach you everything I know. and you'll be smart and strong and nothing like your father. The afternoon sun slanted through the window when Eleanor heard horses approaching. Her heart seized in her chest. Jake had said nightfall. It was too early for him to return. She moved as quickly as her bulk allowed, grabbing the fireplace poker as a weapon, positioning herself behind the door. 3 times the knock came. Then silence. Her hand trembled on the poker. 2 more knocks. Eleanor nearly sobbed with relief. She lifted the bar and pulled the door open to find Jake leading not just Flint, but a pack horse laden with supplies. His gray eyes swept over her, noting the poker, the defensive stance. "Sorry I'm early," he said. "Henderson had everything in stock. Didn't have to wait for nothing. Figured you'd rather have supplies than company." They unloaded together, Eleanor organizing while Jake hauled. The trading post bounty was impressive. Flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, coffee, beans, dried meat, lard, canned peaches, baking powder, blankets, 3 of them, thick wool that would keep away the mountain cold, candles and lamp oil, a bar of soap that smelled like lavender, medical supplies, bandages, thread for stitches, carbolic acid, laudanum for pain, and clothing. 2 simple dresses in sturdy cotton, a nightgown, woolen stockings, a shawl. "Jake, this is too much," Eleanor protested, overwhelmed by his generosity. "This must have cost." "Had money saved," he said gruffly. "Wasn't spending it on anything that mattered. Now it's spent on something that does." Eleanor held up one of the dresses, tears stinging her eyes again. When had she become such a weepy creature? But these were good tears, grateful tears. The dress was simple calico, nothing fancy, but it was clean and new in her size. He'd somehow judged her measurements correctly despite her pregnant state. "I'll pay you back," she said. "Somehow, someday, I swear you'll stay alive and have a healthy baby," Jake interrupted. "That'll be payment enough." He stayed to help her organize the supplies, showing her where the root cellar was, a small dugout behind the cabin where vegetables and supplies could be kept cool. They talked as they worked, and Eleanor learned more about Jake Stockton, how he'd learned to track from a Crow Scout during the war, how he preferred the company of horse to most people, how he couldn't read much beyond his own name but could track a man across solid rock. "Never had time for schooling," he admitted. "My pa needed me working the farm from the time I could walk. By the time I was old enough to want learning, the war came and took away all them opportunities." "I could teach you," Eleanor said impulsively. "I'm a teacher. Was a teacher. I could teach you to read properly, write more than your name. We'll have time while I'm here." Jake looked at her strangely, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes before his usual stoic expression returned. "Might be nice," he said finally. "Always wished I could read the books Sarah used to talk about." They shared a simple supper of beans and biscuits, Eleanor insisting she cook with some of the new supplies, delighted to have real flour and baking powder. The biscuits came out golden and flaky, and Jake ate 4 of them with something like pleasure softening his weathered features. "Haven't had proper biscuits since Sarah died," he said. "She used to make them every Sunday morning, serve them with gravy and jam she'd put up herself." "Tell me about her," Eleanor asked gently. "What was Sarah like?" Jake stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "Small," he said finally. "Barely came up to my shoulder. Had hair the color of wheat and eyes like summer sky. She laughed easy and got mad quick. Threw a skillet at my head once when I tracked mud through her clean house." His lips quirked in something almost resembling the smile. "She was smart, smarter than me by miles. Wanted to be a doctor, but women didn't do that kind of thing. Not where we came from, so she doctored animals instead, and anyone else who needed help and couldn't afford the real doctor in town." "She sounds wonderful," Eleanor said softly. "She was." Jake's voice went rough. "She was everything good in my life, and I left her to go fight a war. Biggest mistake I ever made. But I can't take it back, can't fix it, can't do nothing but live with it." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people bound by loss and circumstance. Outside, the mountain night pressed close, stars bright as diamonds in the thin air. Somewhere out there, Carson Dalton's men were still searching. Somewhere out there, danger waited like wolves in the darkness. But here, in this small cabin, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the bright, naive hope she'd had as a school teacher, planning lessons and dreaming small dreams. This was harder hope, tempered by suffering. Realistic about the dangers ahead, but refusing to surrender to despair. "I'll check on you every 3 days," Jake said as he prepared to leave. "If you need me sooner, there's a dead pine about a quarter-mile south. Tie a red cloth to it if there's trouble. I'll see it from the trail and come running." "Thank you," Eleanor said, "for everything." Jake nodded once, then swung into Flint's saddle. He looked down at her, silhouetted against the darkening sky. "You're going to be fine, Eleanor. You and that baby both. I'll make sure of it." 3 days became a week, then two, and a rhythm established itself in Eleanor's isolated existence. She woke with the sun, built up the fire, made coffee from Jake's good grounds. She swept the cabin floor, washed her dishes in the spring's cold water, mended tears in the curtain she'd fashioned from an old blanket. She read The Last of the Mohicans aloud to her unborn child, did simple exercises to keep her strength up, practiced the breathing techniques she remembered from when her cousin had given birth years ago, and she waited for Jake's visits with more anticipation than she wanted to admit. He came every 3 days like clockwork, always bringing something: fresh meat from hunting, wild berries when he found them, once a bunch of late-season wildflowers that made Eleanor cry for their simple beauty. They fell into an easy companionship. She'd cook while he repaired things around the cabin, fixed the window glass, strengthened the door, built a proper bed frame from hewn logs. And she taught him to read. It started simply enough, with Eleanor scratching letters in the dirt outside the cabin, Jake copying them with a stick. He was frustrated at first, embarrassed by his childlike attempts, but Eleanor had patience learned from teaching dozens of children over the years. "You're doing well," she encouraged, watching him sound out simple words. "Look, cat, hat, mat. You're recognizing patterns already." "Seems foolish," Jake muttered. "Man my age learning his letters like a schoolboy." "It's never foolish to learn," Eleanor said firmly. "Some of my best students were adults who came to evening classes after working all day. They wanted knowledge badly enough to be humble, and that made them learn faster than children who thought they knew everything." By the third week, Jake could read simple sentences. By the fourth, he was struggling through paragraphs. Eleanor watched the wonder in his face when he read his first page of The Last of the Mohicans, without help, and felt pride swell in her chest. "I did it," Jake breathed, staring at the book like it was magic. "I read a whole page." "You did," Eleanor smiled. "And now that you know how, you'll never be powerless in the same way again." Words are freedom, Jake. They're knowledge and power and escape all rolled into one. Something shifted between them during those teaching sessions. They'd been circumstantial allies, bound by her desperation and his code of honor. But sitting side by side, heads bent over the same book, their shoulders sometimes touching, it became something else. Something neither of them knew how to name or what to do about. Eleanor tried to ignore the way her heart beat faster when she heard Flint's hooves on the trail. Tried not to notice how Jake's rough features softened when he looked at her. How his calloused hands were always gentle when he helped her over rough ground. She was 7 months pregnant with another man's child, a fugitive from false justice, in no position to develop feelings for anyone. But the heart, Eleanor was discovering, didn't care much about logical positions. One evening, as autumn began painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Jake arrived with troubling news written in the tense line of his shoulders. "Dalton's men were in Redemption Ridge," he said without preamble. "4 of them, asking questions, showing your picture around. They're offering $1,000 now for information leading to your capture." Eleanor's hand flew to her belly, protective and afraid. $1,000? "Jake, that's double your original bounty, I know." Jake's jaw was tight. "They're getting desperate, which makes them dangerous. I heard them talking in the saloon. They think you might have headed north into Canada, but they're checking every town, every ranch, every settlement between here and the border." It's only a matter of time before they expand their search into these mountains. Then I should leave, Eleanor said, though her heart rebelled at the thought. Find somewhere else to hide, somewhere they won't think to look. In your condition? Jake gestured to her swollen belly. You're 8 months along now, Eleanor. Travel is dangerous enough for a pregnant woman. Trying to outrun determined men across rough country? That's suicide for you and the baby. Then what do I do? Eleanor felt panic rising like floodwater. She'd been so careful, so quiet, barely leaving the cabin. But Carson Dalton had money and reach, and determined men with money always got what they wanted eventually. Jake paced the small cabin, thinking. Finally, he turned to her. Decision made. You stay here. I'll deal with Dalton's men if they come sniffing around. But Eleanor, you need to understand, if it comes to violence, if I have to choose between protecting you and staying on the right side of the law, I'm choosing you. Jake, no. Eleanor stood, moved toward him. I won't let you become a criminal for me. You've already done too much. I've done what's right, Jake interrupted. And killing men who'd hurt a pregnant woman isn't murder? It's justice, the kind the law won't give you because rich men like Dalton own the law. His gray eyes were hard as flint. I won't let them take you. I won't let them hurt you. Or your baby. That's final. Eleanor stared at this hard, dangerous man who'd shown her more kindness than anyone in Providence, who'd risked his livelihood and now his freedom for a stranger. When had Jake Stockton become more than just her protector? When had he become important to her in ways that had nothing to do with survival? Wait a minute, she whispered. Why are you really doing this? Jake was silent for a long moment, his weathered face shadowed in the firelight. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. Because when I look at you, I see Sarah. Not her face, you look nothing alike. But I see that same strength, that same determination to protect someone you love, even when the world's against you. Sarah died because I wasn't there to protect her. I'm here now. I can protect you. Maybe that redeems something in me I thought was long past saving. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She closed the distance between them, stood close enough to feel the warmth of his body. You don't need redemption, Jake Stockton. You're one of the best men I've ever known. His hand came up slowly, uncertainly, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, reverent, nothing like Carson's grabbing hands or brutal force. Eleanor leaned into it despite herself, despite every reason she had to fear men's touches. Eleanor? Jake breathed her name like a prayer. The baby kicked hard between them, a reminder of reality, of complications, of all the reasons this moment couldn't be what they both suddenly wanted it to be. Jake stepped back, clearing his throat. I should go. Dawn comes early, and I've got a bounty to collect. Actual criminal this time. Fellow who robbed a bank in Helena. But I'll be back in 3 days. You remember the signal if trouble comes? Red cloth on the dead pine, Eleanor recited. I remember. The next 3 days felt like 3 weeks to Eleanor, alone with her thoughts and her swelling belly, and the memory of Jake's gentle touch against her cheek. She tried to focus on practical matters, organizing the root cellar, mending a tear in her spare dress, practicing the breathing exercises. But her mind kept returning to Jake Stockton, to the pain she'd glimpsed behind his stoic facade, to the way he'd looked at her in the firelight like she was something precious instead of broken. It was foolish, she told herself. She was pregnant with another man's child, conceived in violence. Jake was a bounty hunter, a man who lived rough and alone, damaged by war and loss. They had no future together, even if she somehow cleared her name and survived. Even if Carson Dalton never found her. Even if the baby was born healthy and she lived through the delivery. Too many ifs, too many obstacles. But the heart, Eleanor had learned, didn't care about obstacles any more than it cared about logic. On the 4th day when Jake should have returned, Eleanor paced the cabin like a caged animal. He was never late. Something was wrong. She went to the door a dozen times, searching the trail for any sign of his approach. Nothing. By evening, worry had transformed into fear. Had Dalton's men found him? Had there been trouble with the bounty he'd gone to collect? Was he lying hurt somewhere, or worse? Eleanor made herself eat, made herself bank the fire, made herself lie down on the bed even though sleep was impossible. The baby was restless too, moving constantly, as if sensing her mother's anxiety. "He'll come," she whispered to her unborn child. "He promised he'd come back, and Jake Stockton keeps his promises." But promises could be broken by circumstance, by violence, by the cruel randomness of frontier justice. Dawn broke on the fifth day with no sign of Jake. Eleanor's hands shook as she built up the fire, her mind running through terrible scenarios. Should she go looking for him? But where would she even start, 8 months pregnant and on foot? The red cloth signal only worked if Jake was alive to see it. Mid-morning, she finally heard hoofbeats. Eleanor rushed to the door, flung it open, then froze. It wasn't Jake. 3 men sat on horseback at the edge of the clearing, studying the cabin with the predatory focus of wolves who'd found prey. One of them pulled out a piece of paper, compared it to Eleanor, and smiled. "Well, well," he said, voice carrying across the clearing. "Eleanor Hartwell. Mr. Dalton's have been real worried about you, ma'am." Eleanor's hand found the doorframe for support. These were Dalton's men. She recognized the hardness in their eyes, the casual cruelty in their smiles. The leader was tall and lean with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The other two were rougher types, the kind Carson hired to do his dirty work. "You've got the wrong person," Eleanor tried, though her voice shook. "I don't know any—" "Don't insult us, ma'am," Scarface interrupted. "We've been tracking you for weeks. Knew you had to be holed up somewhere in these mountains. Just took time to search them all." His eyes dropped to her swollen belly, and his smile widened. "Mr. Dalton didn't mention you were carrying his child. That's going to complicate things." "Carson Dalton is a rapist and a liar," Eleanor said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "I won't go back to Providence. I won't let him kill me for a piece of land." "Well, that's where you're wrong, ma'am." Scarface dismounted slowly, his companions following. "You are coming back. Whether you walk or get tied over a saddle is your choice. But Mr. Dalton paid us good money to bring you in, and we're men who finish wet." Eleanor backed into the cabin, reaching for the fireplace poker. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all she had. "Stay back," she warned. "I'll fight. You'll what?" One of the other men laughed. "You're 8 months pregnant and alone. This won't take but a minute." They advanced on the cabin, confident and cruel. Eleanor gripped the poker, positioned herself as best she could, prepared to defend herself and her baby with everything she had left. Then a rifle shot cracked through the mountain morning, echoing off the peaks. All 3 men froze. Another shot kicked up dirt at Scarface's feet. The third shot went through the leader's hat, sending it spinning into the dust. "Next one goes through your skull." Jake Stockton's voice rang out from the tree line, cold and hard as winter steel. "Your choice." Eleanor's knees nearly gave out with relief. Jake emerged from the panes, rifle leveled, his gray eyes promising violence. He looked different than she'd ever seen him, not the gentle teacher's student or the kind provider of supplies. This was Jake Stockton, the soldier, the hunter, the dangerous man who'd survived war and wilderness by being harder than his enemies. "Who the hell are you?" Scarface demanded. "Man who owns this cabin," Jake lied smoothly. "And that lady's under my protection. You boys need to ride out right now before this turns into something nobody walks away from." "There's 3 of us and one of you," one of Dalton's men pointed out, "and we're getting paid $1,000 to bring her in. You really want to die for some fugitive woman?" "I've killed more men than you've got years," Jake said conversationally. "War, bounties, self-defense, doesn't matter the reason, they're all just as dead. I can drop 2 of you before you clear leather, and the third before he gets off a shot. Question is, are you willing to bet your life that I'm bluffing?" The 3 men looked at each other, weighing odds and survival against Carson Dalton's money. Eleanor could see the calculation in their eyes. Was $1,000 worth dying in a mountain clearing? "Mr. Dalton will just send more men," Scarface said finally. "You can't protect her forever." "Maybe not," Jake acknowledged, "but I can kill everyone he sends until he decides she's not worth the blood price. Ball's in his court now." The standoff stretched for heartbeats that felt like hours. Finally, Scarface cursed and mounted his horse. "This ain't over," he warned. "Dalton wants her bad enough to Tell Dalton if he comes for her himself, I'll give him the same choice I'm giving you. Ride away or die here. His money's no good to him if he's 6 feet under Montana dirt. The three men wheeled their horses and rode hard down the trail, leaving Eleanor shaking in the doorway and Jake still watching the tree line through his rifle sights. Only when the hoofbeats faded completely did Jake lower the weapon and turn to Eleanor. You all right? She nodded, then shook her head, then burst into tears. Jake caught Eleanor before her knees buckled completely, easing her down onto the chair by the fireplace. Easy, he murmured. It's over. They're gone. You're safe. They found me, Eleanor gasped between sobs. How did they find me? I've been so careful. Luck, persistence, and Carson Dalton's money, Jake said grimly. They've been searching these mountains systematically, checking every cabin, every mine, every place someone might hide. I heard about it 2 days ago and rode hard to get back here, but I was tracking that bank robber 30 miles south. Didn't make it in time to warn you. Eleanor gripped his arm, needing the solid reality of him. You saved my life. If you hadn't been here. But I was here, Jake interrupted firmly, and I'll keep being here as long as you need me. He pulled back gently, studying her face with concern. But Eleanor, they'll be back. Maybe not those three. I put enough fear in them. But Dalton will send others. He's not going to stop. Then what do I do? Eleanor felt hysteria bubbling up. I can't run. I can't hide. I can't fight men like that. No, Jake agreed, but I can. He moved to the window, checking the trail one more time, then turned back to her. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay right here in this cabin until that baby comes. I'm going to move my camp up here, be close enough to see anyone approaching. And when you're recovered enough to travel, when the baby's a month or so old and strong, we're going to leave Montana entirely. Head somewhere Dalton's reach doesn't extend. Oregon maybe, or California. Somewhere you can start fresh. Jake, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. Jake crouched in front of her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. Eleanor, I haven't cared about anything or anyone in 15 years. Not really. I've been going through motions, hunting bounties because it gave me something to do besides drink myself into an early grave. But you, helping you means something. Protecting you and that baby, that matters. Maybe it's selfish. Maybe it's just me trying to save someone I couldn't save before. But I need to do this. Let me do this. Eleanor reached out and cupped his weathered face in her hand, feeling the rough stubble of his beard, the warmth of his skin. You're a good man, Jake Stockton. Better than you give yourself credit for. Something in Jake's expression cracked, vulnerability showing through like light through storm clouds. His hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his cheek. I'm a killer and a drifter who can barely read and owns nothing but a horse and a rifle. But if you'll have me as your protector, I swear on Sarah's grave I'll keep you and your baby safe. I'll die before I let Dalton's men touch you. Don't talk about dying, Eleanor whispered. I've lost too much already. I can't. She stopped, uncertain how to finish that sentence, uncertain what she was really saying. Jake seemed to understand anyway. He stood slowly, drawing her up with him, careful of her balance and her belly. They stood close enough that Eleanor could feel his warmth, see the silver threads in his dark hair, count the small scars that marked his hands and face. Nothing's going to happen to my and nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to see this through together. The baby kicked hard between them, as if agreeing with Jake's plan. Eleanor laughed despite her tears, placing Jake's hand on her belly so he could feel the movement. That's quite a kick, Jake said, wonder softening his features. Strong baby. Going to be a fighter, like the mama. I hope not, Eleanor said softly. I hope this baby gets to grow up safe and loved, never having to fight or run or be afraid. That's all I want. A quiet, ordinary life for my child. No violence, no fear, no men like Carson Dalton. Then that's what you'll have, Jake declared. I'll make sure of it. Over the next week, Jake moved his entire camp to a position where he could watch the approach to the cabin. He built a small shelter among the rocks, barely more than a lean-to, but it gave him a clear view of the trail and positioned him between Eleanor and any potential threats. He took to sleeping in shifts, always alert, um, always watching. Eleanor protested at first. She didn't want Jake living rough while she had the comfort of the cabin, but he was immovable on this point. "I've slept worse places," he said. "Muddy trenches during the war, frozen ground tracking bounties in winter. This is luxury compared to some camps I've made." They fell into a new routine. Jake would check on her multiple times throughout the day, bringing fresh water from the spring, game he'd hunted, wood for the fire. Eleanor cooked meals they'd share, always making extra for Jake to take back to his camp. She continued teaching him to read, and he progressed rapidly now that he had both motivation and time to practice. One evening, Jake read an entire chapter of The Last of the Mohicans, aloud without help, and Eleanor applauded like he'd performed a miracle. "I never thought I'd be able to do this," Jake said, staring at the book with something like reverence. "Sarah used to read to me sometimes in the evenings, and I always felt like I was missing something, like there was a whole world in those pages I couldn't access. Now I can. You gave me that, Eleanor." "You gave yourself that," Eleanor corrected. "I just showed you the way. You did the work." They sat together as the sun set, shoulders touching, the book between them. Eleanor felt the baby shift and settle, felt the warmth of the fire in Jake's presence, and thought that despite everything, the danger, the fear, the uncertainty, she'd never felt quite so content. It was a strange thing to realize here in this mountain cabin while running for her life, but somehow Jake Stockton had become her home. "Jake," she said softly, "what happens after? After the baby comes, after we leave Montana, after we find somewhere safe?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose that depends on what you want. I can help you get established somewhere. Make sure you have money and shelter and safety. Then I can move on, if that's what you prefer." "And if I don't prefer that?" Eleanor asked, her heart hammering. "If I wanted you to stay?" Jake turned to look at her fully, gray eyes searching her face. "Eleanor, I'm 15 years older than you. I've got no property, no prospects, nothing to offer but protection and what skills I've picked up surviving. You're educated, refined, could do better than a worn-out bounty hunter who's killed more men than he can count. You're also kind, honorable, protective, gentle with me when you don't have to be." Eleanor held his gaze. "You're teaching yourself to read because learning matters to you. You've risked everything to protect me and my baby. Those things matter more than property or prospects, Jake. At least to me." The baby came 3 weeks later on an October night when the first real snow was falling on the high peaks. Eleanor had felt odd all day, restless, uncomfortable, her back aching in a way that felt different from the usual pregnancy pains. By evening, she knew. The contractions started slow and far apart, giving her time to call Jake down from his watching post. "It's time," she said simply when he appeared at the door and watched his weathered face go pale. "Time? Now, but—" Jake looked around the cabin as if proper medical facilities might materialize from thin air. "Should I ride for a doctor? There's one in Redemption Ridge, though it's 40 miles. "No time," Eleanor said through gritted teeth as another contraction gripped her. "Besides, Carson's men are probably still watching the town. We do this ourselves, Jake, just like women have been doing forever." Over the next hours, Jake Stockton, veteran of the Civil War, hunter of dangerous men, survivor of countless deadly situations, discovered that helping deliver a baby was the most terrifying thing he had ever done. Eleanor walked, breathed, gripped his hands hard enough to bruise while waves of pain crashed through her body. Jake boiled water, tore clean cloth into strips, followed Eleanor's gasped instructions even when he had no idea what he was doing. "You're doing fine," he kept saying, though his voice shook. "You're strong, Eleanor. You can do this." "I can't," Eleanor sobbed during a particularly brutal contraction. "It hurts too much. I can't." "You can," Jake insisted fiercely. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known. You've survived things that would have broken most people. You can survive this too." The night stretched endless. Eleanor lost track of time, lost track of everything except the pain and Jake's steady presence. He never left her side, never complained, never showed anything but complete confidence in her even when she had none in herself. And finally, as dawn began painting the eastern sky gray, with snow still falling soft outside the cabin window, Eleanor gave one last tremendous push, and the baby slid into Jake's waiting hands. "It's a girl," Jake breathed, staring at the tiny, squalling infant with absolute wonder. "Eleanor, you've got a daughter." Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, but desperate to see her baby. Jake cleaned the infant with trembling hands, wrapped her in soft flannel Eleanor had prepared, and placed her gently in her mother's arms. "Hello, little one," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my darling girl." The baby was perfect. Tiny pink face, dark hair plastered to her skull, eyes squeezed shut as she howled her outrage at being born. Eleanor counted fingers and toes, checked that everything was as it should be, marveled at the miracle of this small life she'd created. This baby who'd been conceived in violence but born in safety, delivered by a bounty hunter with gentle hands in a mountain cabin far from civilization. "What will you name her?" Jake asked softly, still hovering nearby as if afraid to leave them alone. Eleanor looked at her daughter, then at Jake, this hard, broken man who'd become her savior, her teacher, her friend, perhaps something more. She thought of all the names she'd considered during her months of running, all the traditional choices that had seemed appropriate. But looking at Jake's weathered face, at the wonder and protectiveness already shining in his eyes as he gazed at the baby, Eleanor knew there was only one right answer. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Jake's eyes went bright with unshed tears. "Hope," he repeated. That's perfect." The next days passed in a blur of feeding, sleeping, changing, the endless cycle of infant care. Jake proved surprisingly helpful, heating water for Eleanor to wash with, cooking simple meals, rocking Hope when she fussed so Eleanor could rest. He looked almost comically large holding the tiny infant, his calloused hands impossibly gentle as he supported her head, murmured nonsense words to soothe her crying. "You're good at this," Eleanor observed one afternoon, watching Jake walk the cabin floor with Hope tucked against his shoulder. "Natural father material." "Never thought I'd get the chance," Jake admitted. "After Sarah died with our baby, figured that door was closed for good. But this," he looked down at Hope's small face. "This feels right, like maybe some things do get second chances." Eleanor felt her heart swell with emotions she wasn't quite ready to name. She'd been so certain she'd never trust a man again after Carson, never want one close, never feel anything but fear and revulsion. But Jake Stockton had proven that not all men were monsters. Some men were protectors, some men were gentle, some men kept their promises and cared more about honor than money. 2 weeks after Hope's birth, Eleanor was recovering well but still weak. Jake had been checking his traps and hunting daily, keeping them supplied with fresh meat. He returned one afternoon with a deer carcass and troubling news. "Saw tracks," he said without preamble. "4 horses coming up the trail from Redemption Ridge. Could be innocent travelers, but probably not," Eleanor finished, clutching Hope closer. "Dalton's men. Most likely." Jake began checking his weapons, rifle cleaned and loaded, revolver in good condition, knife sharpened to a razor edge. "They'll be here by nightfall, I reckon. I need to meet them away from the cabin, keep you and Hope out of the line of fire." "Jake, no." Eleanor stood despite her lingering weakness. "You can't face 4 men alone. That's suicide." "Got no choice," Jake said flatly. "I won't let them get close enough to threaten you. This ends tonight, one way or another." "Then I'm coming with you," Eleanor said desperately. "I can shoot. My father taught me." "You're 2 weeks out from giving birth and have a newborn to protect," Jake interrupted. "You stay here, bar the door, and if you hear gunfire, if I don't come back, you take Hope and run. There's supplies cached half a mile north, enough to get you to the next settlement. Promise me, Eleanor." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she wouldn't let him face danger alone, but the truth was she was still too weak to be useful in a fight. And Hope needed her, needed at least one parent to survive. "Come back," she whispered instead, gripping his arm. "Please, Jake, don't make me lose you too." Jake cupped her face with one rough hand, his eyes intense. "I'll come back. I've got too much worth living for now to throw it away." Then, surprising them both, he bent and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Keep Hope safe. I'll handle the rest. Jake positioned himself on a rocky outcropping overlooking the trail, rifle ready, counting the riders as they approached in the fading light. 4 men, just as he'd estimated. Not the same 3 from before. Dalton must have hired new muscle, men willing to risk mountain ambushes for his money. They rode cautiously, eyes scanning the terrain, clearly expecting trouble. The leader was older than the others, gray-haired and hard-eyed. The kind of man who'd done dirty work for rich men his whole life and had no illusions left. The others were younger, hungrier, more reckless, dangerous in different ways. Jake let them get close enough that running would be difficult, then stood up from his cover, rifle leveled. "That's far enough, gentlemen," he called down. "You're on private land, and you're not welcome." The 4 men reined in their horses, hands moving toward weapons. The gray-haired leader held up one hand, stopping them. "We're looking for Eleanor Hartwell," he said calmly. "Wanted fugitive. We heard she might be hiding in these mountains. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "Never heard of her," Jake lied. "But I know you're going to turn those horses around and ride back the way you came, or we're going to have problems." "See, now that's interesting," the leader continued conversationally, "because we heard tell of a bounty hunter up this way who's been protecting a pregnant woman. And bounty hunters usually care more about money than protecting fugitives. Makes a man wonder what changed your mind, unless maybe you're hoping to collect that bounty yourself." "I'm hoping you'll be smart enough to value your life over Carson Dalton's money," Jake replied. "But if you're not, I can oblige you with the alternative." One of the younger men laughed. "4 against 1, old man. You can maybe drop 2 of us before we fill you full of lead. Those odds don't favor you." "Kid, I've survived worse odds than this." Jake's voice was cold as winter wind. "War, ambushes, situations where men better than you tried to kill me. They're all dead. I'm still here. You want to test your luck against mine? Go ahead. But the smart play is to ride away." The gray-haired leader studied Jake with the calculating gaze of a professional. He saw what the younger men didn't, the absolute stillness of a man comfortable with violence, the steady hands that never wavered, the cold certainty in Jake's eyes that said he'd already accepted the possibility of dying and decided it was worth it. "Dalton's offering $1,500 now," the leader said, "for Eleanor Hartwell, delivered alive. That's enough money to retire on, friend. Enough to buy land, start fresh, live comfortable. You sure you want to die protecting a woman who's worth that much money?" "I'm sure," Jake said simply. "Last chance to ride away." The leader sighed, then nodded to his men. "Kill him." Everything happened fast. Jake shot the first young gun out of his saddle before the man could draw. The second got his revolver clear, but Jake's second shot caught him in the chest, sent him tumbling backward off his horse. The third managed to fire, his bullet whining past Jake's ear, close enough to feel the wind of its passage. Jake rolled behind cover, worked the rifle's lever, came up firing. The third man went down with a scream. That left the gray-haired leader who'd dismounted with professional calm during the chaos and taken cover behind a boulder. 2 old killers, both good at their work, now facing each other across 30 yards of rocky Montana terrain. "You're good," the leader called out. "Better than I expected, but I'm good too, and we can do this dance until one of us makes a mistake, or we can talk reasonable." "Nothing to talk about," Jake replied, reloading. "You're leaving or dying. Those are your options." "Dalton won't stop sending men," the leader pointed out. "He's got money and obsession. Bad combination. He'll keep coming until Eleanor Hartwell is dead or he is. You can't protect her forever." "I can protect her tonight," Jake said. "Tomorrow will handle itself." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the groans of wounded men and the nervous stamping of frightened horses. The sun had fully set now, darkness pooling in the valley below, stars emerging bright and cold overhead. "What's she to you?" the leader asked suddenly. "The woman. You're risking everything for her, your life, your freedom, $1,500. A man doesn't do that for nothing. You in love with her?" Jake didn't answer immediately. Was he in love with Eleanor? He'd been telling himself he was just keeping a promise, just protecting someone who needed protecting, just trying to redeem some part of his damaged soul. But sitting here in the dark, knowing he'd already killed 3 men tonight, and would kill this fourth if necessary, Jake had to admit the truth. "Yeah," he said finally. "I am. Not that it's any of your business." "Makes it my business when I'm supposed to kill you and take her," the leader replied. "But here's the thing. I'm too old and too tired to die for Carson Dalton's obsession. Those three boys were young and stupid. I should have known better than to ride up here. So I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to leave. Tell Dalton I couldn't find her. Search came up empty." "Just like that?" Jake was suspicious. "Just like that," the leader confirmed. "I've killed men for money before. Plenty of them. But I've never killed a man defending the woman he loves. That's a line I won't cross. Call it getting soft in my old age." Jake heard the man moving, then the sound of a horse being mounted. The gray-haired leader appeared briefly in the starlight, hands visible and empty. "You've got yourself some trouble coming, friend," he said. "Dalton's the kind who doesn't give up, but you seem like the kind who doesn't either. May the best man win." He touched his hat brim in an old-fashioned gesture of respect, then rode away into the darkness. Jake stayed in position for another hour, making certain it wasn't a trick. Finally satisfied, he checked the three bodies. All dead, no chance of them causing future problems. Then made his way back to the cabin. Eleanor flung open the door before he could knock, hope clutched to her chest. "I heard shooting. I thought—" She stopped, taking in the blood on his shirt, not his own, the hard set of his jaw, the look in his eyes that said he'd killed again and hated himself for it, even if it was necessary. "It's over," Jake said roughly. "For tonight at least. 4 men came. 3 won't be going back." Eleanor should have been horrified, should have flinched away from the evidence of violence. Instead, she set Hope carefully in her makeshift cradle and moved to Jake, wrapping her arms around him despite the blood and gunpowder smell, holding him while he stood rigid and traumatized. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for protecting us. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Something in Jake broke then, not in a bad way, but like ice breaking in spring, releasing everything he'd kept frozen and locked away for 15 years. His arms came around Eleanor, careful of her still healing body, and he held her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "I love you," he said hoarsely. "God help me, Eleanor. I love you. I know it's too soon. I know you've got every reason not to trust men. I know I'm nothing but a killer who can barely read. But I love you and that baby, and I'll keep killing anyone who tries to hurt you until there's nobody left to send." Eleanor pulled back just enough to look up at his face, her green eyes bright with tears. "I love you too, Jake Stockton. You're not nothing. You're everything that matters. Your safety and kindness and honor. You're the man who taught himself to read because learning matters. You're the father Hope deserves, even if you didn't give her life." She smiled through her tears, "And you're the only man I've ever truly chosen to love." What happened next wasn't a fairy tale ending, because real life rarely grants those even to people who've earned them. Jake and Eleanor stayed in the mountain cabin through the winter, making their small family unit work through snow and isolation. Jake continued hunting and trapping. Eleanor cared for Hope and taught Jake more advanced reading. They were cautious, always watching the trail, always ready to run if Dalton's men returned. But spring came, and with it news that changed everything. A traveling preacher stopped at Jake's camp, one of the wandering holy men who served the scattered mountain communities. Over coffee, he mentioned that Carson Dalton had been killed in Providence, Wyoming, shot by a woman named Martha Hendricks, whose husband Dalton had swindled out of his ranch. Martha had walked into the saloon and shot Dalton in front of 20 witnesses, then calmly waited for the sheriff. "Whole town turned out to testify that it was self-defense," the preacher said, shaking his head. "Said Dalton had threatened her, that she feared for her life. Jury took 10 minutes to acquit her. Turns out Dalton had been cheating half the town, and nobody was sorry to see him dead." Jake and Eleanor looked at each other across the campfire, hardly daring to believe it. With Dalton dead, the money funding Eleanor's pursuit dried up. The false charges remained technically active, but without Dalton's influence and pressure, no one cared enough to keep searching for a woman who'd allegedly stolen some jewelry and money. They were free, not completely. Eleanor would always be technically wanted unless someone bothered to clear her name formally. But practically, realistically, they were free to leave the mountains, to start over somewhere Dalton's shadow didn't reach. They chose Oregon. Jake sold what bounties he'd collected, combined it with Eleanor's small savings and money from selling his camp equipment. They traveled slowly, cautiously, Jake now openly presenting himself as Eleanor's husband, Hope as their daughter. No one questioned it. A frontier family moving west was too common to warrant second glances. They settled outside a small town called Silver Creek, where Jake bought a modest farm with good water and decent soil. It wasn't much, 20 acres, a small cabin that needed work, a barn that leaned slightly to one side. But it was theirs, bought with honest money, worked with their own hands. Eleanor taught at the local school, grateful to use her education again. Jake farmed and hunted, continued improving his reading until he could get through entire books without help. He was gentle with Hope, teaching her to ride before she could properly walk, reading to her every night in his rough voice that gradually grew smoother with practice. They married properly that summer, in the small church with half the town attending. Eleanor wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Jake wore his only good shirt. Hope, nearly a year old, played with flowers during the ceremony and made everyone laugh. It wasn't perfect. Eleanor still had nightmares about Carson Dalton sometimes. Woke crying and had to be reminded he was dead. Couldn't hurt her anymore. Jake carried guilt for the men he'd killed protecting her. Saw their faces in quiet moments. Hope would grow up knowing her biological father was a monster, would have to reconcile that truth someday. But they had each other. They had safety. They had a future that looked like peace instead of running. Years passed. Hope grew into a strong, intelligent girl who could read by age 4, shoot by age 6, and had her mother's determination combined with her adopted father's steady calm. 2 more children followed, a boy named Thomas and another girl named Sarah, after Jake's first wife. The farm prospered modestly. Eleanor eventually became headmistress of the school. Jake served briefly as deputy sheriff, his tracking skills and steady nature making him valuable to the community. They never forgot those desperate months in the mountain cabin, never took for granted the safety they'd built. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Eleanor and Jake would sit on their porch and remember. "You saved my life," Eleanor would say. "You saved mine first," Jake would reply. "Gave me something worth protecting, worth living for. Before you, I was just existing. After you, I was alive again." And Hope, when she was old enough to understand the story, would ask her father, "What made you choose Mama over the bounty money? What made you risk everything?" Jake would think carefully, then answer with the wisdom of a man who'd learned that something matter more than survival, more than money, more than safety itself. "Because some choices define who you are," he'd say. "And I decided I'd rather be a man who protects innocent people than a man who profits from their suffering. I decided love and honor matter more than gold. Your mama didn't need a perfect man. She just needed a man who'd choose right over easy. That I could do." The lesson Eleanor and Jake learned, the one they passed to their children, was this. Sometimes life tests you in impossible ways, forces choices between safety and conscience, between wealth and honor. The easy choice often looks tempting. Take the money, avoid the risk, protect yourself first. But the right choice, the one that lets you sleep at night and look yourself in the mirror, is always choosing to help instead of harm, to protect instead of profit from suffering, to be brave when bravery costs you everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, choosing right brings rewards no amount of bounty money could ever buy. Love, family, peace, and the knowledge that you became who you were meant to be. If you enjoyed this journey into the Wild West, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me what you thought of Jake and Eleanor's story. Share this video with someone who loves frontier romance, and subscribe for more tales of courage, love, and survival from America's wildest era. These stories matter. They remind us that honor still means something, that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose to care when the world tells us not to. Thank you for listening, and until next time, May you always have the courage to choose right over easy.